Hey everybody, I'm Mr. Mills, and today we're going to be solving equations involving absolute values. So, it's been quite some time since we solved an equation with an absolute value in it. Remember, an absolute value means how far away something is from zero, the total distance from zero, okay? And so, a quick example of an absolute value, if I had, let's say, the absolute value of 3, right? Remember those bars? These bars represent the absolute value, okay? So if I'm looking at a number line here, I got 0, -1, -2, -3, and then 1, 2, 3. I'm trying to find what's the total distance away from 0, right? That's what absolute value implies. So the absolute value of 3 is, well, where is 3 at on a number line? On a number line, 3 is right here, okay? And so, what is my total distance from 0? Well, I'm 1, 2, 3 units away from 0, okay? So, the absolute value of 3 is just 3. Okay, now, similarly, if I had the absolute value of -4, I'm trying to find out how far away from 0 is -4. Okay? So on a number line, -4 is over here. Right? -4 is right there. And how far away is -4 from 0? Well, -4 is 1, 2, 3, 4 units away from 0. So the absolute value of -4 is 4, okay? And so absolute values essentially mean that once you simplify the inside of that absolute value as much as you can, you're really just going to make it positive, okay? But the trick is that absolute values kind of give us two answers most of the time, right? So if, for example, let's say I had the absolute value of -2. Okay? The absolute value of -2 is just +2. Okay? And then also, let's say I have the absolute value of 2. What's the absolute value of 2? Well, it's just 2. Okay? And so there was two different absolute values that gave me the same different answer. Or excuse me, the same answer. Same different answer. So the absolute value of -2 gave me 2. And also the absolute value of 2 gave me 2 as well, right? And so we really got two different answers there. So when we are solving these equations, we're actually going to get two different answers, okay? So whenever you solve an absolute value equation, 9 times out of 10, you'll get two different answers. And for everything that we're going to do in this class, for everything that we are reviewing, you will get two answers, okay? And so, if I have this absolute value of x plus 2 equals 4, what I'm first going to do, remember I'm going to get two different answers, so what I'm first going to do is I'm going to recognize, hey, this is an absolute value equation. And what I'm going to have to do to solve this thing is that since I need two answers, I'm going to have to somehow split it into two different equations. Okay, so I'm going to split this guy up into two equations. Now, my first equation is just going to be x plus 2 equals 4. X plus 2 equals 4, okay? So I really just take away the absolute value bars and everything else stays the same. Now, my second equation is going to be slightly different. I'm still going to have x plus 2, but that's going to equal, instead of having +4, that's going to equal -4. Okay? And so now, I really have two different equations going on. I have x plus 2 equals 4, right? +4. And then I have x plus 2 equals -4. I made this side of the equation negative, right? So now I really have two different equations to solve. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2 from both sides. And when I subtract 2 from both sides, I get x equals 4 minus 2 is 2. That's one of my answers. Okay? And then over here, this really completely separate equation, I'm going to do something similar to get x by itself, right? I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So I get x equals negative 4 minus 2 is negative 6. Okay? So I really have two different answers here. I have positive 2 and negative 6. And if I were to check both of my answers into the original equation, they would both work, right? If I took 2 and subbed it in, I'd have 2 plus 2, which is 4. And then the absolute value of 4 is 4, which is good, right? That means that works. If I checked negative 6, I would have negative 6 plus 2, which is negative 4. And then the absolute value of negative 4 is positive 4, right? So again, that guy would work. So like I said, in that absolute value equation, we have two different answers. Okay, and so 9 times out of 10, we'll get two different answers. Let's try this guy, get over here, see how many we're gonna get. Probably 2, but I'm not sure, right? So that absolute value is completely by itself over here. So since it's completely by itself, let's go ahead and split it up into two different equations. So sometimes I call this the mountain thing. I don't know why, it's just, it looks like a mountain when I split it into two different equations, right? So one equation is gonna be 3n minus 4, and that equals 8. And then my other equation is gonna be 3n minus 4 equals negative 8, okay? And so now, just like the last problem, I have two separate equations here to solve. So let's start with this one, right? Let's add 4 to both sides. Okay. When I add 4 to both sides, I'm gonna get 3n equals 8 plus 4 is 12. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and divide by 3 to everything. And when I divide both sides by 3, I get n equals 4. Okay, and that's one of my answers, right? But I still need to get one more, right? I still got to get this guy over here. Okay, so now I have 3n minus 4 equals negative 8. So I'm going to go ahead and solve this basically the same way. Let's add 4 to both sides. Okay, but now I have, when I add 4 to both sides, I get 3n equals negative 12. Or, excuse me, I get negative 4, right? Negative 8 plus 4 is negative 4. All right, and now I have one more step. 3n equals negative 4. Well, I got to get n by itself. So let's go ahead and divide both sides by 3. Now when I divide both sides by 3, I get n equals negative 4 divided by 3 doesn't really reduce down. It doesn't go to an integer, right? So I'm just going to leave it as a fraction. I'll just leave it as negative 4/3. Okay. Good, so now I have two answers here, right? And both of these, I should check into my original equation, but just trust me, both of these are going to work, okay? I wouldn't give you any that didn't work, with the exception of one that I'm about to show you, okay? So, like I said, both of these problems, they both have two different answers, right? 2 and negative 6, and then this one has 4 and negative 4/3. Usually you will get two answers. Now, there is one exception, well, a couple exceptions, but there's one exception really in this class that we'll address, and that is this. Let's say I had an example that was, how about x plus 3 equals negative 5, okay? And this is the exception that I have. Right now, I have an absolute value that equals negative 5, okay? So since this absolute value equals negative 5, I don't know much, but I know one thing. I know that the absolute value of a number, except if it's 0, but the absolute value of a number is always going to be positive, right? When you take the absolute value of negative 2, like we did earlier, we got positive 2. When you take the absolute value of negative 10, you get positive 10, right? The absolute value of positive 3 is positive 3, right? The absolute value of a number is always going to be positive. Okay, so right here I have this equation. The absolute value of x plus 3 equals -5. Now wait a second, think about it. If the absolute value is always positive, right? Absolute value is positive. When you take the absolute value of a number, it's definitely going to be positive, okay? How can the absolute value of something equal a -5? How can an absolute value equal a negative number? That doesn't really make sense, right? How can a positive number equal a negative number? That doesn't work, right? So right away, when I have this equation here and I see absolute value equals a negative number, I know my solution is one thing and one thing only, and that solution is, ironically, no solution. No solution. Okay? And that would be my answer here, because I have an absolute value that equals a negative number. Whenever I have an absolute value that equals a negative number, it is a no-go. It's not going to work ever, right? Now, if I went ahead and solved this whole equation and got two different answers at the end, that's fine. But remember, you should check your work, right? And when you check your work and you sub those answers you got into the very original problem, you would see that they don't work, right? But I'm skipping those steps. I don't need to do that stuff because I see right off the bat that absolute value equals -5. That can never happen. An absolute value will always be either 0 or it will be a positive number. Okay? That's solving absolute values in a nutshell. Thank you guys for watching. Marine Pride.